opposed to that. But it's tough to get it back. They pointed that out.
Yes, sir. It's been worse.
All right, let's call this meeting to order. Today is the 11th, 13th, I'm sorry. 5:50. Make us all stand for the pledge.
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, let's set up a few of the ground rules. This is a step 3 grievance hearing in public at the request of the officer. Evidence is presented by counsel for the officer and counsel for the police department. The public is not allowed to speak unless they're called as a witness. All right, let's get started. Who's starting first?
Well, based on that last statement, sir, I kind of wanted, with the being accompanied by Ms. Bailey, to speak with you and see if you would rather have people submit their written submissions or be called as witnesses with regard to the issue of recusing yourself, as they feel that perhaps statements that have been made in the past would lead one to believe that an unbiased hearing could not be held at this point. Now, they are here, they're willing to speak, or they have their statement also in writing.
Could you, Mr. Cahill, do you have a motion to make to recuse members here?
Well, I would, based on the information that I just recently got, as dated today, I would like to put and make a motion before the council, that they, the commission, that they consider the contents of the 3 parties that are willing to make the comments and put it to writing, and we'll sign same. And since I knew they were going to be represented by counsel, I think they should probably use your expertise, whether that you believe there'd be an ethical conflict here. I believe that there's a potential for that, especially with regard to Commissioners Gagnon and Commissioner Roy. Based upon the information that was sent to me today.
Understood. I think what the commission would like to have, Mr. Cahill, is for you to summarize the evidence that you think would result in recusal for either Mr. Gagnon or Mr. Roy. Then Ms. Bailey can reply to that if she wants, and we will then consider where we want to go from there. We may want to hear the witnesses actually testify under oath about it, but we'd rather hear what they have to say first through you.
All right, would you like a copy of?
No.
Okay.
We want to hear what you have to say.
Most of the issues arose out of different commission hearings. One of them being the Hooksett Budget Committee members were meeting on February 12th, where one representative of the Budget Committee stated that Commissioner Gagnon said, I think it was about the money, I think the money is being spent wisely, but some people need to go. That means legal costs. We need to make sure everything is done correctly. We can't use general attorneys any longer. We now need to use specialized attorney. I think the reason this person came forward was they felt that it was already determined that some people have to go, and there's very few people that actually have something before the commission. And if they felt like that before they even heard what the grievances were, then they've already made up their mind, and we're basically just spinning our wheels here. And that was by Mr. Dana Argo, and he has been a resident of 17 years, and he's on the Hooksett Budget Committee. Another one summarizing it is by Mr. Mark Maville from the Town Budget Committee, and he objects to this hearing going forward tonight on several reasons. He does believe there's a bias of the commissioners against Officer Jason DeFener. He bases this on a Budget Committee meeting January 31st, 2009 from the minutes, where he quotes the chief and states that there is some distrust of Town Hall. If something is asked of us, we are always looking at why. The chief goes on page 10 of the minutes. It is a fact in law enforcement that the caliber of people currently is not what they used to be. We have great employees, but the pool is less.
The chief is being pulled?
Yes.
Okay, but are we talking about?
Well, I think it goes because other people kind of chime in. I personally, first of all, don't think it's my place to summarize what the citizens of Hooksett feel. I think they should be making the statements that they've prepared, because they're the ones that lived it, they're the ones that heard it, and they're the ones that feel strong enough to be here. So I'm not going to sit here and be picked apart on something that was just handed me from taxpayers of Hooksett that want to be heard with regard to recusal. If you don't want to hear from them, and that's the decision you want to make, then make it. I will submit it. I will reserve my objection for later. But you asked me to summarize something that I just got before I got in the car to drive an hour and a half up. So I'm not in a position to do that.
Well, okay, if you can't do it, then that's what we want to hear. I mean, if you aren't in a position to make the motion, see, we have to deal with you and Ms. Bailey on this. And so, if you believe, as the representative of the Teamsters, and Mr. DeFener, Officer DeFener, that one or both of the commissioners should recuse themselves, and I wanted to hear why you thought that. Because we have to deal with you first. Maybe we will hear from these people directly, under oath. But first we wanted to hear you make the motion. Mr. Cahill, if you don't make the motion to recuse them, then they won't be recused. So you've got to do it.
Well, from the statements made by the taxpayers of Hooksett that are here, I do make a motion that Commissioner Gagnon and Commissioner Roy, because of the few statements that I've seen here, recuse themselves from hearing the grievances on Officer Jason DeFener. And especially where it's backed up, where Commissioner Roy already states that he has an opinion, at least by the papers here, that Officer DeFener has a candor issue. So if he already believes that Officer DeFener has a candor issue, then I think that offers of proof are not going to go very far, at least from my standpoint.
Okay, so, to be clear, the reason that you're making a motion to have Mr. Gagnon recused
Is also
is because of a statement at a February 12th Budget Committee meeting, which you've already told us about.
yes, that's correct.
Okay. And the reason that you would like to have
Mr. Roy?
I didn't really hear when that was supposed to have been said about Mr. Roy.
On Friday, February 20th, Ms. Maura Olet attended a meeting with the Hooksett School Superintendent, Dr. Phil Littlefield, and in front of the Chief, Commissioner Henry Roy. At this meeting, Commissioner Roy made a statement in reference to School Resource Officer Jason DeFina, where he said Jason has a candor problem.
And does that cover it for, is that the evidence that's to be recorded?
The fact that Commissioner Gagnon believes that a few officers have to go, and there are very few officers who are scheduled to come before the commission at this point, and Commissioner Roy stating that he's already determined that Officer DeFina has a candor problem in performing his duties as a police officer for the Department of Hooksett.
That summarize?
That's a summary of it.
Thank you. The police department objects to this motion. First of all, we believe it isn't timely. What is before the commission this week is 4 grievances and an issue of whether 3 other grievances will be waived. And the 4 grievances, just to put things in context about why we're here. One involves Officer DeFina's complaint that he was called back to work and was fully paid for that time. Another involves his complaint he wasn't given an overtime series of shifts that he had wanted. And 2 others involve a 2-day suspension recommended by Captain Paul Cecilio, who's with us tonight, and another 5-day suspension recommended by Lieutenant Troy Klein. None of these grievances involve any sort of issue about whether or not Officer Boschman has been recommended for termination. That is DeFina. I apologize. DeFina. And I do apologize for that. There's no issue of termination before this committee tonight. They all do involve what is always before the commission in any sort of grievance hearing, and that is an interpretation of the collective bargaining agreement between the Teamsters and between the police department. These grievances were originally scheduled to take place on March 2nd, and Attorney Cahill was kind enough to let us know in advance that there may be some issue whereby Officer DeFina was asking for 1 or more members of the commission to recuse themselves. We had asked the union to put a motion in writing. We had asked that it be supported by affidavits or by Officer DeFina's verified statement, and that never came to pass. If you do decide to consider the motion as being timely, as seen as it's brought this evening, and Attorney Cahill, to his credit, is trying to address these issues on relatively short notice, there is no basis to recuse based on the evidence that's been presented. The February 12 minutes of the Budget Committee have been approved on February 26th, and it seems as if the issue concerning Commissioner Gagnon relates to one statement that he is attributed as having made. Needs to be looked at in context, which is that there was a give and take going on between members of the Budget Committee, and questions were being asked of Commissioner Gagnon concerning legal expenses. There was no discussion of any particular officer. There was no discussion of Officer DeFina. And it's important to know that after Commissioner Gagnon's statement is referenced in the minutes, Mr. Willett, who was on the Budget Committee, indicated that he would like to go on the record that these questions and comments, and again, there was a give and take back and forth between Commissioner Gagnon and the Budget Committee, were in no way directed towards any police officer or any police staff. We have heard an allusion to a statement made by Chief Agrafiotis, who is not part of the commission. And in fact, it's interesting because the statement is, in fact, Chief Agrafiotis confirming his viewpoint that the police department currently has some very good employees. Lastly, we have the statement that is attributed to Commissioner Roy, and a statement such as that is not sufficient to warrant recusal. there's a legal presumption under New Hampshire law that this commission is of good conscience and it's capable of hearing the evidence and reaching a just and fair result. That's the legal presumption that exists as we sit here, and it's up to the union to rebut that presumption. In the case law in New Hampshire, one case by analogy is Appeal of Hopkinton School District, found at 151 New Hampshire 478, 2004 case, is that the union would have to prove actual bias by one or more of the commission members, and that hasn't been proven here. It's certainly understandable that in New Hampshire you would need that actual bias standard, because we're lucky enough to live in small towns, to know one another. It would be relatively impossible for people not to have met one another, know who they are, know who I am, who Mr. Noonan is, who Attorney Cahill is before tonight. They have not met that burden with the evidence that they've presented to you, and so for those reasons, we ask that the motion be denied and that this board go forward and hear Officer DePina's grievances.
The union stands by the motion for recusal, also offers the actual witness statements to be taken live if you so choose. I would strongly suggest that the commissioners consider what was said, and the fact that third parties will be looking at this in the future, and it's important to give the weight that it's worth. I mean, if these statements were made, I wasn't there. These are statements made by other taxpayers that felt strong enough to bring it to my attention, although I wish it was heavy statements for both our benefits prior to this, to kind of work this out before we got here on grievances. But I do think it's something that should be carefully considered, and then we'll move on from there.
I'd like to make a motion that we have a private meeting with council.
Motion is for a non-meeting with council. Second?
Aye.
All in favor? Aye. We'll take a 5-minute recess. Make a motion to come back into public.
Second.
In favor?
Aye.
All right. Take a vote on my refusal. I vote no.
No.
The reason for the no on mine is that I do not believe at the time Officer DePina was on my mind for that statement. It was a back and forth statement at the time of a budget cut. Vote on Henry's recusal. I vote no.
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 My statement was made at a private meeting, and it is public knowledge that Officer DePina is in violation of the Lurie case, and the Lurie case regards candor. So I feel I have no biases in going forward and listening to these grievances.
Okay, let's proceed. Who started?
I believe, if you would like, Commissioner Gagnon, we were going to address an issue of 3 grievances, whether or not they were waived.
Okay, go ahead.
There are 3
Could you use the mic, please?
Sure, I'm sorry about that. Let me know if you can hear me.
We can't.
Thank you. Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay, let me know. There are 3 grievances involved that the police department contend have been waived. One's grievance number 0903, which involves a 2-day suspension recommended by Captain Cecilio. One is grievance number 0904, which is a 10-day suspension recommended by Lieutenant Klein. And one is grievance number 0905, which is a 5-day suspension, again recommended by Lieutenant Klein. For the folks who are here tonight, Captain Cecilio and Lieutenant Klein will be talking about their recommendations over the course of this week. Captain Cecilio has worked for the police department since 1988. He's risen through the ranks from being a patrol officer to being captain. Before he attained management status as a captain, he had been active in union matters for a number of years and had been a assistant union steward for several years. Lieutenant Klein is a relative newcomer to the Hooksett Police Department. He's had a long law enforcement career already, having served with the Biddeford, Maine Police Department for a number of years, which is a relatively large police department. He's also had a career in the Army, serving as a drill sergeant, a master drill sergeant, and a sergeant major. He served in Iraq. And in his past life as an officer, he served as a union steward for 7 years. We believe that these grievances have been waived because the police department did try to work with the union and with Officer DePina to ensure that they were brought in a timely manner before the commission. And the union, for whatever reason, elected not to do so. Just to give you a brief chronology, and if I may take a moment, may I approach with some notebooks that I have some materials in for this week?
Sure.
Thanks. And Attorney Cahill already does have a copy of these materials. Sure, great. And for our purposes, what I'm going to be talking about is found behind tab 1 of the notebooks I just gave you. But essentially, to put things in some chronological order, on March 6th, Officer DePina was given 3 disciplinary matters I just talked to you about a little bit by Captain Cecilio and Lieutenant Klein. They were recommendations by these gentlemen. They were not any sort of disciplinary action that had gone into effect at that point. So they were simply recommendations at that point. In order to be effective, they needed to be approved by Chief Agrafiotis. So if you look, I put just handwritten numbers at the top of each page for your reference. But if you look at pages 4 and 7 and then 10 of these materials, what you'll see is the form that starts the various grievances. And you'll see that each of those grievances were started on March 10. Now at that point, Chief Agrafiotis had not reached any sort of determination whether or not he was going to accept or reject or accept part of, but not all of, these recommendations from Lieutenant Klein. On March 13, Lieutenant Klein was going to be out for the day, and he came into work early, and he saw that these 3 grievances were left for him. There was no opportunity to discuss them with Officer DePina or with the union steward. So at that point, Lieutenant Klein gave them to Captain Cecilio, and they both agreed that these grievances were premature because they made recommendations, but the chief hadn't indicated whether or not he was going to agree with those recommendations. So then Captain Cecilio that same day takes these premature grievances to Chief Agrafiotis. Chief was then working on his determination about whether or not he was going to accept or reject the recommendations in question. And he agreed also that the grievances were premature. Just there wasn't anything to grieve at this point. So the chief finished up his determinations, and he did in fact agree with the recommendations, and he asked Captain Cecilio to give back the grievances to Officer DePina, and to let him know essentially that he could simply refile them, because now there had been something to grieve. The chief had made a determination about the suspensions. And so Captain Cecilio tried to do that in a number of ways. He asked to meet with Officer DePina Officer Defina wanted a witness. Captain Cecilio agreed that he could have one if he wanted one. Officer Defina didn't get one, and essentially what we were left with is Captain Cecilio gave him back the premature grievances and said, just resubmit these, that's all you need to do. And the end of the day came and went, and Officer Defina hadn't done that, to Captain Cecilio's surprise. So at this point, there's no grievance pending from the police department's perspective, because they just started the process too early, is what it comes down to. And this would be a pretty easy fix. So instead of just ignoring the issue, Lieutenant Klein reached out not once but twice to both Officer Defina and to the union steward, Mr. McGowan. And if you look at page 14 and 16 of the materials behind tab 1, you'll see that Lieutenant Klein followed up with an email to Union Steward McGowan, just making it clear so that everybody could understand that from the police department's perspective, there wasn't any grievances pending. They just needed to resubmit them, a pretty straightforward matter. If you look at page 15 of your materials, I'm sorry, I apologize, page 5. You'll see the grievance that was actually, that is the subject of all of this. But what it comes down to is that Lieutenant Klein did follow up 2 times. He did try to reach out to both of these gentlemen. And in fact, they indicated that as far as the union was concerned, the grievance were already submitted. We simply did not believe that to be the case. And so what happened then is that rather than let this issue be unaddressed, the chief tried to take the initiative and wrote a letter to Officer McGowan on March 27. And that is behind tab 1 as the first couple of pages. And what he essentially said is, from the police department's perspective, we don't think there's any grievances pending. If you would like to grieve these matters, please just turn something in by the end of today, because that's when we think the timeline has gone by. So this is not a situation of the police department ignoring Officer Defina. It wasn't a situation where the police department was doing anything to impede his ability to grieve suspensions if he wished to do so. The department was simply trying to work with Officer Defina to make sure that the process was followed, and the union declined to do that. So for these reasons, we believe that these grievances at this point have been waived. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
This is an issue where, again, I think discretion would have eliminated this completely. These things are time-stamped, date-stamped. The chief came down with his determination on March 13th. These grievances were filed on March 13th. If you look at the captain's memo on page 13, which is the second page of the captain's memo, actually, if you look at the first page, third paragraph, last sentence, if you wanted to hand his grievances back in at the end of the day, I would accept them. Keep in mind that they're standing in the police station with the grievances in hand. It's after 1 o'clock. His shift ends at 3 o'clock. And the argument is it's untimely. It's one of those things that takes up a lot of time over something that should have just been accepted. The chief had already made his determination when the captain was down talking to Officer Defina. So the grievance was viable at that time. It's time-stamped the 13th, and it's the union's position that it was filed timely. It was filed on the same day as the chief's determination, and the fact that the captain was I don't really know why the captain would say, if we stand here for an hour and a half, I'll accept it, because that's basically what it states, because his shift ends at 3 o'clock, and they already had a meeting. So it's the union's position that it was timely filed. And as far as the email to Officer McGowan, although it looks good on paper, Officer McGowan was not working that day. So that was not really a last shot across the bow because he wasn't working. So it didn't go to anybody. So it's our position that, as stated, it was filed. It's stamped by the Department of Hooksett as March 13th. That's the date of the chief's determination that he would go forward with these disciplinary actions, and therefore we've met our burden that these grievances are ripe for you to go before you later in the week.
May I just make a couple points of clarification? I don't know that I made this particularly clear. The March 13 date stamp that you'll see on the grievance forms reflect the fact, as I tried to explain, that these were received on March 13, but before the chief had made any sort of determination. So we do believe that they were premature. But to get to the point of how easy things could be, there was a really easy fix for all of this, which is to simply turn around, resubmit it. They're accepted because the deadline runs from when the chief made his determination approving the recommended disciplinary action. So certainly when Lieutenant Klein is reaching out to Officer McGowan on the 19th, there's a lot of time left. There's time left up to the date of the chief's letter that the union could have taken a really easy step, even if they disagreed with the department, taken a really easy step and just simply resubmitted these. So we do believe that they're waived. Thank you.
If I may respond, I mean, the easy fix, I respectfully submit to the commissioners, was that the captain take the grievances that he had in hand and just keep them, since he had the determination by the chief in his other hand. So at that point in time, those grievances were live. And to the captain's credit, he states, I'll take it at the end of the day. And it was Officer Defina's and the union's position that it was submitted in a timely manner. In fact, usually an issue arises when someone ignores it and doesn't submit it. The whole idea of submitting a grievance in a timely fashion is to give notice to the department that there's an issue here. And it's usually because of a delay. Very rarely have I seen someone have a problem because it was potentially, I guess what the argument is, it was potentially an hour and a half early. If that's what the argument is. But the bottom line, it was filed on the 13th.
Then by your statement, you're saying he filed them before he was given this.
No, that's not what I'm saying. He filed them when he was notified by the lieutenant, and then he was there receiving the determination letter from Captain Klein, Captain Celio, I apologize for that, and he had given the grievance letters to the department, appealing and wanting to go to the next level, which is the commission level, on the same day.
Before he got the decision, is what you're just saying.
It's not what I'm saying.
If you're saying the captain already had them in his hands before he told them what the discipline would be, he filed them before he got the discipline.
If you tell him, if the argument is that by the captain giving them back after the determination is made by the chief is up on the second deck, he gives his opinion, and the grievance is there, signed on the 13th by Officer Defina. What you're saying is we're going to play semantics in minutes. The whole purpose is to give notice to the department that there's a grievance here, that there's a harm. That harm, the notice of harm, was actually when he first got notice that they intended to suspend him, and it was confirmed when the chief acted on it by confirming it. It all happened on the same day.
motion to go in non-meeting with attorney. All in favor? 5-minute recess. There's no doubt that they were submitted early, even by words of counsel. So, does somebody want to make a motion and a vote?
I make a motion that Officer Davina has waived grievances, report number 903, 904, 905.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Moving on to grievance report 0804, I'm sorry. Who'd like to start? Mr. Cahill, do you want to start?
Sure. This grievance has to do with callback, calling an officer back from duty when they're off duty. I'll try to use the packet that says under the callback provision, someone can get called back for what the union perceived was for emergency functions, personnel shortages, floods, that type of thing. This grievance was filed as a result of Officer Davina being on a day off and being called in and being asked to write a rebuttal to a newspaper story, of a weekly newspaper story, and he's asked to come in on a Friday. And he told the powers to be at the police department that he was in the process of moving, had hired a truck, was scheduled to work the following day, that it would be a major hardship for him to come back, and was this a police-related emergency? And he was told no, it was not. It was to respond to an article in the Hooksett Banner. Now, to my knowledge, the Hooksett Banner comes out once a week. He was scheduled to work Saturday, the next day. The department was persistent and ordered him to come in, knowing full well the hardship that it would present, and we think an abuse of article, the callback article, which was put in place so that the chief could have the ability to bring people in for floods, personnel shortages when people don't show up, not for public relations or getting someone lunch or ad infinitum. It has a very specific meaning, because if you look at the whole contract, there's even a section that talks about changing someone's shift, and they need a 10-day notice. But for emergency purposes, then the callback paragraph would control. But again, where this has, quite frankly, this hasn't been a problem in any other police department that the Teamsters represent, nor has it ever been a problem with the Mass State Police, and it goes to discretion. You want to call someone back on the day off, it ought to be related to work, it ought to be an emergency, and when you know that it's going to cause them personal hardship, and you've got a small town like this, and a small building where everybody has to work together, there's no reason to put someone through that type of grief, to write a rebuttal article, when the person is not a public relations person. So, he was paid, so he's not looking for money. He's looking for the town to change what their interpretation of the callback to be what the union thought the interpretation of the callback was for personnel shortages, emergencies, and police-related incidents. And that's where the union stands on that issue. So basically, the town paid Officer Davina 5 hours overtime to do a rebuttal to an opinion piece that was in the local paper on his day off.
Bailey?
Thank you. as with any grievance hearing, we have to interpret the collective bargaining agreement that the parties agreed to. And Article 22 is what we're talking about. It's at page 15 of the collective bargaining agreement. And we have to look at what it actually says. What it says is that employees called back to work after having left the station at the end of their shift or during any other period of off-duty hours must report back to work. Compensation will be paid for a minimum of 4 hours for callbacks for law enforcement purposes, including emergencies and other reasons as determined by the chief or the chief's designee. And then the language of the article does continue from there. But that is what we need to focus on, what the language of the article actually says. It does not limit a callback to only emergencies or floods. It gives the chief some discretion as to when he feels there is a necessary reason to call an officer back to work. We don't disagree that certainly it contemplates that it's for law enforcement purposes and other reasons. And what happened here is that the department did comply with Article 22. In your packets of material, I have essentially a compilation of the grievance and how the grievance has been handled at the various stages. But for purposes of chronology, essentially on Thursday, November 13, the chief did become aware of a letter to the editor and another article in the Hooksett Banner about an issue in Hooksett schools. And it caused him some concern because he wasn't aware of any issues in the schools that rose to the magnitude and to the level that were being described in these newspaper pieces. So he wanted to understand the situation better. And he asked Captain Cecilio about it. Captain Cecilio likewise did not understand that there were any issues that were as described in this editorial letter. So at that point, it seemed logical and it seemed necessary to the chief that the person who would be most directly involved in the situation, the school resource officer, be asked to assist in clarifying the state of affairs as the school resource officer understood it. So that's why the chief asked that Officer DeFina come in the next day. Now, it was not because he was Officer DeFina, but because as a school resource officer, he was obviously a person that had information that could contribute to this. Certainly, any time an employee is called back into work, it's contemplated and understandable that it's going to result in some inconvenience of some sort to that employee. That's certainly regrettable. But the contract language is what the parties agreed to here. And clearly what the chief was asking Officer DeFina to do was to come in and do some work in relation to what his job function was, the school resource officer. It was certainly job-related. It was certainly law enforcement related. There's no question that Officer DeFina wasn't happy about it, but there's been no contract violation here that's occurred at all. If Officer DeFina and the union believe that they don't like the way Article 22 is written at this point, that's certainly a subject that they can bring up down the road when there are contract negotiations. But we need to look at what Article 22 says right now. And based on that wording, there's not been any violation. Officer DeFina was called back. He reported back as he was obligated to do, and he was fully compensated for all of his time that day. Thank you.
I'm addressing you as a police commissioner. I'm addressing you as the tribunal that is to look at these articles that are just words on a piece of paper that need to be interpreted by reasonable people. You have to look at Article 21, which talks about hours of work and overtime. That wasn't breached. What was breached was Article 22 callback, which was put there for emergency reasons. Was there some reason that after being notified that he was moving and had a moving truck, did anyone think that the knowledge that he had on Friday was going to disappear on Saturday? It's just, you have a small department. You have 11 or 14 patrol officers on the street. 11 officers on the street. I think that discretion, or, people, we all have rules we live by. How we enforce those rules is the way we get by day to day. And this is something that does allow a callback, but there was a purpose. When you form a contract, there's intent. There's a meeting of the minds of the parties. And the meeting of the minds of the parties were people that involved the police departments in the past has always meant to mean that an incident needing police assistance, whether it be personnel shortage, like I discussed. It's not just, oh, I want Bill Cahill to come back in and paint the cellar. So I would ask you to agree with the union's viewpoint that Article 22 has been violated, and this issue should be addressed, and discretion should be used prior to enforcing Article 22 on people that are on a day off for non-emergency related activities. Thank you.
Can I ask a question? Mr. Cahill, what exactly is the relief that the union wants on this agreement? Because the way it's written up here, what was put down was an immediate change in the contract, which you and I know is collective bargaining, not for agreement. So could you tell me just the finding that there was a violation?
At this point, I was not involved in this when this took place. He was paid, so that's by the boards. But just a finding at this point is what we're looking for, a resolution of this. That the finding there's been a violation of Article 22.
Mr. Cahill, you said that he was called back just to write a rebuttal for the newspaper. Is that the issue? Was he called back to find out answers on what was in the paper, not to write the rebuttal? I'm just curious.
It had to do with the...
I know what it had to do with.
Well, I don't understand the difference.
Your statement was that he was called back strictly to write a rebuttal for a weekly newspaper. I'm asking you if he was called back in so that the chief or the captain, whoever called him back in, could get information on what was in the paper that they didn't have or supposedly didn't have. There's a difference. That's all I'm asking.
But you're asking me to get in the minds of the captain and the chief, and I don't think I'm...
But you made that statement. Was he called back strictly to write a rebuttal for a weekly paper?
He was called back directly as a result of an article being placed in the paper.
But not to write a rebuttal for that the next day.
It doesn't come out the next day. It's a weekly
I
paper.
understand that. But your statement was
My-
that he came back to write a rebuttal.
What the chief does once he writes the response to the article is up to the chief or his designee. My point is that the information that Officer DeFina had on Friday is the same information he would have had at no cost to the taxpayers of Hooksett on Saturday. And he could have answered the same questions and could have addressed the same issues, responding to a to-from the chief or the captain or the lieutenant.
Okay, thank you.
I'm still a little confused. Was he asked to write the rebuttal to the paper or to his supervisors? Or explain the incidents to his supervisors?
He was asked to write a rebuttal to the supervisors.
Not to the paper.
It derived from the paper, but obviously when he's audited, he's writing to the supervisors. It's a paramilitary organization, sir. They usually go through the chain of command.
That's not what you said. That's where
Excuse me? Don't put words in my mouth, sir. With all due respect, my problem was very, very succinctly stated, was that he was called in as a result of a newspaper article on a day off, and it was not a police emergency, and the main point being there was nothing that he did on Friday that he could not have done on Saturday. It did not advance any benefit to the department whatsoever, except to cause a hardship to Officer DeFina.
Bailey?
Thanks. Let me try to clear this up a little bit. The reason why Officer DeFina was called in is because the chief needed to get a better understanding as to what was the current situation in the schools, and he had a question about that based on the language of a letter to the editor. I should note that Officer Defina being called in on his day off wasn't the first option the chief explored. He talked with Captain Cecilio, reports were looked at, and after that, the chief still had some remaining questions. So he wanted Officer Defina to come in and try to clear up and get so the chief could have a better understanding of the current situation in the schools. I think that instead of being criticized for that, I think that's a good thing for the chief to do. I would hope he wouldn't want to delay in making sure he felt that he had a good grasp on what the situation was when he saw a letter in the paper that seemed to him did not jive with his understanding of what was going on. So he certainly was, not only did he not violate the contract, it was, I think, an important thing that he thought he was doing to try to get better information as soon as he could. And again, we just still need to look back on the contract language itself, and if you do, you'll see how it's written, that there's been no violation here. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to grievance 0805. Cahill, do you want to start?
No, that was just one, wasn't it?
I can go ahead and start with that, as this involves a disciplinary recommendation. This grievance involves Officer Defina's grievance about a recommendation by Captain Cecilio for a 2-day suspension for discourtesy and for incompetence. And what I will try to do is go through your packet of materials a little bit with you, because there are some documents I'd like to point out to you. Essentially, Captain Cecilio's recommendation arose from a December 18 memorandum that Officer Defina had written. But to put that in proper context and to help explain why Captain Cecilio felt the way he did in making his recommendation, we kind of need to look backward by a couple of days. If I could have you turn in your packet of materials behind tab 3 to the handwritten page that is marked at the top corner as page 18. And what you should see is that there is a handwritten page that says in handwriting, "Lieutenant, I found this in today's paper," with an exclamation mark. "Thought you should know," another exclamation mark. Then there is a blurb from a newspaper about a commission meeting. And beneath that in handwriting, "I love finding things out about my job in the paper." That handwriting was Officer Defina's. So what happens is that on December 16, Lieutenant Klein comes into work, and he's with us tonight, as I've said. He comes to work in the morning, and he finds this waiting for him. He doesn't find it in an envelope, in a bin outside of his office, or in any sort of other private, appropriate way of communicating as people do with one another and as officers would do with their superiors. Instead, what happens is he comes into work and he finds this taped to the outside of his door. His doorway isn't a hallway where other people go by. I don't think that anyone could seriously think for a minute that that's the appropriate way to address a concern with your superior, to tape it out for anybody walking by to see. And Lieutenant Klein didn't think that was appropriate. He thought that was disrespectful of him and of the department. He was also disturbed by the tone of his handwritten note. To him, it read in a rude way, in an insolent way, in a sarcastic tone. It wasn't professional in tone as far as he was concerned, and there was certainly some editorializing by Officer Defina. So that bothered him a great deal. He did not feel that that was an appropriate way for an officer to communicate with a lieutenant. If I could ask you to look in the same packet of material at pages 16 and 17, what happens next is that Lieutenant Klein believes that under those circumstances, Officer Defina should have been disciplined. And that day, there is a meeting between Lieutenant Klein, Captain Cecilio, Officer Defina, and Union Steward McGowan, and they're talking about a variety of issues. But what you have in front of you at pages 16 and 17 is the personnel records entry form in which Lieutenant Klein is documenting this issue and in which he is recommending a 1-day suspension because he believes it to be discourtesy under the department rules. and he indicated it's not going to be tolerated. Well, at the meeting, it was actually a good opportunity for people to talk about issues, and Officer DeFina and Lieutenant Klein had a chance to talk about this, and Officer DeFina explained himself to Lieutenant Klein and that he'd been frustrated and upset, and what Lieutenant Klein did was listen to him and give him the benefit of the doubt. And so as they were sitting there, Lieutenant Klein changed the recommendation from a one-day suspension to counseling. Now, Captain Cecilio, as I said, is part of this meeting, and he would say that he felt that there was no question in his mind that Officer DeFina's conduct had been discourteous and that it was not appropriate. But Captain Cecilio deferred to Lieutenant Klein's decision to reduce the recommended discipline from a suspension to no discipline, and that was counseling. And also at this same meeting, there was a chance for Captain Cecilio to go over with Officer DeFina some instructions about Officer DeFina's SRO job. And if you turn to pages 19 and 20 in this same section of materials, what you'll see is a personnel records entry form from this December 16 meeting, at which Captain Cecilio wrote in very, very detailed fashion his expectations about what Officer DeFina would be doing as a school resource officer. And this had come out of some meetings that Captain Cecilio had been a part of with various school principals. And so he took this opportunity, even though Lieutenant Klein had already, as you'll see from this, had instructed Officer DeFina on many of these issues, Captain Cecilio sat down and he really tried to put forth as best he could and as clearly as he could his expectations of Officer DeFina. So that's what you'll see on these 2 pages. And they went over this information in some detail. Officer DeFina had a chance to ask questions if he had any. And Captain Cecilio was simply trying to reinforce what he felt that Officer DeFina should already be aware of. And from Captain Cecilio's perspective, it seemed to be a pretty straightforward meeting. Now, if you could turn to pages 14 and 15 of those same materials, and I thank you for letting me shift you all around here. What you have here is the December 18, 2008 memo from Officer DeFina to Lieutenant Klein. This is the memo that Captain Cecilio's recommendation for a 2-day suspension is based on. And it's notable that it is accompanied by a sticker in which Officer DeFina says, "Lieutenant, this is in no way sarcastic." And he goes on to say it has only good intent. But then what happens is that Officer DeFina asks a series of questions that frankly do not seem to be genuine questions. They don't seem to demonstrate a whole lot of common sense. And that's how Captain Cecilio viewed this memo when he read it. He viewed it as these questions did not seem reasonable, did not seem to make sense, did not seem to demonstrate that somebody was being something other than sarcastic. And by way of a couple of examples, in the first, and this memo does key back to Captain Cecilio's December 16 memo. But for instance, Officer DeFina is asking a question, asking if every day means every single day or just the days he's scheduled to work. A person reading Captain Cecilio's memo would obviously, applying some common sense, understand that what Captain Cecilio was concerned about was his expectations on Officer DeFina's scheduled work days. Officer DeFina asked a question about, well, how long do you think it should take me to check my car? Again, another issue that an experienced police officer, and Officer DeFina has been with the department since 1999, presumably would know and would not need to ask. So, putting yourself in Captain Cecilio's shoes, at this point, he'd sat through a meeting 2 days before in which he had seen Officer DeFina demonstrate discourtesy and had been given, frankly, a break by Lieutenant Klein. And now what he is seeing is a series of questions and a note that he supposedly wasn't being sarcastic, that Captain Cecilio did take from his perception, as Officer Davina being sarcastic and as him wordsmithing. Under Article 18 of the collective bargaining agreement, the chief does have the ability to order discipline if he feels that there is just cause to do so, either for unsatisfactory performance or for misconduct. You'll see at pages 4 and 5 of this same packet that the chief did review this. He did look at Captain Cecilio's recommendation, and he did agree with Captain Cecilio that under the circumstances, it did appear that discipline was necessary and that Officer Davina had been discourteous and he had demonstrated incompetence under the police department regulations. And you also have a copy of those cited regulations in your packet as well. So this is where Captain Cecilio was coming from in formulating this recommendation. And based on this information and what you see before you, we believe that Article 18 has not been violated because the 2-day suspension under the circumstances and placed in proper context was for just cause.
You have in your tab on 18, there is no swearing, there's no profanity, and I think it's a stretch to say that it's rude. There's a lot being said about it wasn't placed in the door the right way. Unless there's a policy and procedure of how to place mail on a door, I don't even know why that was brought up. As far as the memorandum to Lieutenant Klein as a result of the captain's memo, the captain's memo was very specific, and Officer Davina has been obviously disciplined for very specific violations. Just tonight, the word is, be a short commercial break. To very specific readings of the articles. So he's in an SRO program, which is rather new. It's not something that's been around for decades. There's a learning curve, and by the way, it should be noted that he was appointed there by the chief, and it should also be noted that, to my knowledge, there's been no complaints from the schools about his competence in dealing with school issues. As a matter of fact, to my knowledge, he has quite a following, and he's well revered in the schools by the children and the parents that he meets. So as far as incompetence with regard to his title, I don't think that's appropriate. Now, with all due respect to the captain, and I mean that as someone that in 26 years never rose above the rank of trooper, so I do respect your rank. On paragraph 1, on the above date and time, I tell you to get on the road as you were I had to tell you to get on the road as you were still hanging around the station. Well, that was at 7:15 in the morning, on page 19, tab 3. First paragraph. So, 7:15, usually the officers go in, check their mailbox, check if there's any messages, pick up what they need for their cruiser, and they have to do a cruiser checklist. So 7:15, although the time is not here, but after speaking with Officer Davina, that's what time it was. It says you immediately check your car and go on the road. You shouldn't be hanging around the station. It says your cruiser should already be cleaned of any debris, but as a matter of fact, it's not always clear of debris, and that has to be taken care of. The checklist has to be performed. And then it goes into detail about, also I gave you remedial training this year and personally showed you with a master cylinder, brake fluid, oil stick, and goes into over detail. And I mean, you can read into it what you want, but it seems like a little bit of a ribbing coming from the captain on cruiser maintenance. And then it talks about how to be at the schools when the buses arrive and following the buses. And if you read the paragraphs, there are points that it makes it look like you have to be at two places at one time, either following the buses and then being at the bus stop as the children get off the bus at the school. And so there was some confusion with regard to where the priority was. Was it following the buses up to school or being at the school to see them disembark from the buses? And as far as another thing, it says you're also required to fill out your SRO log every day. Well, to this date, there is no SRO log. So, I mean, you're asking an officer to do stuff that isn't in place. So, to say that he's being sarcastic by asking questions about stuff that doesn't exist, I think you're really pushing the envelope here. The SRO program has been beneficial to this community. It's something I have in my own community, and we like it. And like I said, every issue we hear tonight, nothing is generated from outside the department. Everything is from within. This is very unusual. So I would ask you to look at his response in the light that some of the things that are placed in the memo for him to do have either, one, not been established, number two, mean that he has to be in two places at once, and the fact that this kind of has a chilling effect on whether or not he should ask questions of what to do with the captains if you stand the chance of being brought up on charges because you want clarification. I believe his first line is Lieutenant Klein, and then it goes to Captain Cecilio. So we would ask that you uphold his grievance.
I have one question, and I don't know who can answer it, or Captain Cecilio. It said, you say there was no such thing as an SRO log. It must be some kind of animal that he was alluding to. I don't.
Captain Cecilio might be the best person to answer that, but my understanding is there is a log that Officer DePina fills out.
Daily patrol log, and we handled that verbally in that meeting, as well as some of the other questions, but the questions asked are not the questions that are in that memo.
And if I could add a point, I think that was discussed by Mr. Cahill. Going back a step as to the initial handwritten note, it's not the practice for people to tape notes on doors. That's why Lieutenant Klein was taken aback and very disturbed by it. He has an out bin outside his office. If there's something you need to relate to him, you can put it in an envelope, put it in there, maintain the privacy of it. And it just simply, the manner of communication was inappropriate under the circumstances. I think most people could appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate that it was allegedly cleared up verbally, but the fact of the matter is, it's written in here, SRO log. If someone wanted the daily log and it wasn't being done, then I think it would reflect the daily log and patrol log, which all the patrol officers do.
Captain Cilio, you say that these questions aren't the questions that you were asked. How did these get in writing?
Those aren't the questions that Officer DePina asked in his memo.
Do you have any record of that?
If Officer DePina had wrote in his memo that he wanted to know what the SRO log, I would have answered it. That's not the questions that are asked in his memo.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions?
Can you stand by for 1 second on that, please? I respectfully disagree with the captain saying it's not in the memo that he wrote. On tab 3, page 15, second paragraph, specifically states the SRO log. Otherwise, I wouldn't have brought it up, but I was reading from his memo.
He-
He's correct.
Do you have that, Paul?
Yeah, I just looked at it, he's correct. At the end of his thing, he does ask that one question.
Paul?
As a matter of fact, the paragraph does talk about the question, if he was referring to patrol officer's daily log. It says, the first line of the sixth paragraph states, you are also required to fill out your SRO log every day. My question is, as of right now, there isn't an SRO log. I fill out a patrol officer's daily activity report like the other patrolmen do. Could you find out if me filling out the PODA is going to be okay with Captain Cecilio for now, until you and I have time to sit down and work on which forms will work best for the program? If it's not okay, I could probably whip up something simple, SRO form, or change the heading on the PODA form to read SRO log. Please let me know. That to me sounds like someone that's trying to forward the SRO program in a positive way, not trying to make a problem, just trying to go by the letter of the memo.
A question, how did we get from counseling to suspended for 1 day? Was it off of for 2 days? One thing I see here is a check marking suspended for 1 day. Am I missing something?
If I could point out to you, on page 13, which is something we didn't specifically go over, that is the 2-day suspension that we're talking about, and I apologize, I didn't bring that to your attention specifically. But you have 2 separate recommendations, one personnel representatory form for December 23, and that's the disciplinary action that's being grieved tonight, the 2-day suspension. Sorry, if I could clarify, on page 13, that's Captain Cecilio's recommendation for a 2-day suspension that resulted in a 2-day suspension. That's what's being grieved. And on page pages 16 and 17, that was an earlier recommendation by Lieutenant Klein that he ultimately decided to change and just simply provide counseling. So the page 13 is the discipline that is the subject of tonight's grievance.
And on behalf of the union, I would state that we're not here regarding the counseling issue.
Now we're saying that this courtesy was due to this memo. Is that what we're basing the 2-day suspension on?
The 2-day suspension is based on a couple of things. It's based on the December 18, 2008 memo, which is at pages 14 and 15. But why I was addressing with you Lieutenant Klein's earlier recommendation, which is found at page 16 and 17, ultimately reduced to a counseling, is because it needed to be referenced because it played a role in how Captain Cecilio was looking at the December 18 memo. It played a part in why he reached the decision that he did to make a recommendation for a 2-day suspension.
And if I could respond to that, there's nothing in the suspension letter that references the counseling. The counseling was for putting mail the wrong way in a slot. But I don't think, you can ask the lieutenant, but I don't think the lieutenant minded getting mail or a heads up regarding something in the paper to deal with the SRO program. He just didn't like the way it was put in there. They talked it out, and there was no discipline at that point.
Do you have anything to say?
I'm sorry, we keep going back and forth with this microphone. Where you see it, and Captain Cecilio would tell you that his reasoning was based on that whole interaction with the handwritten note on the 16th as well, but you do see it in his write-up on page 13, where he indicated that Lieutenant Klein had also spoke with you that day about writing discourtesy notes to him in regards to a separate note you had left him about the SRO program. So he did reference his thought process that the interaction on the 16th between Lieutenant Klein and Officer Defina had played a part in why he was thinking about things the way that he did. So Captain Cecilio did try to explain that.
Do you want another turn?
I thought you were going to ask the lieutenant a question, I'm sorry.
No, if you will.
I don't want to beat a dead horse, it's just that I didn't think the initial thing that for counseling was rude or objectionable. It's not something that I'd be embarrassed to show my wife or my daughter. You know, I don't know how touchy, you know, things are in this department. Chain of command was observed. It was given to his chain of command. He didn't jump. His memo brought out some very good points that weren't addressed in the captain's memo, and those were pointed out to you. So, in the totality of the circumstances with regard to this grievance, I think the discipline should be overturned.
And the relief you're requesting is, because there are two, this first and the second on this grievance report, you're requesting record be expunged and he be made whole.
Made whole, correct, with the back pages.
Has a 2-day suspension been served?
It's affirmative.
Lieutenant Klein,
Yes, sir.
when you changed yours to counseling, did you feel that you had settled your differences with this note?
Just with respect to the council, no, I don't agree with his opinion. It's a matter of how mail is submitted to the agency. That's not the case here. The case is there are exclamation points. It's smacked of insubordination. Just by reading it, the way it was displayed for all to see as they walked by my office, there, Lieutenant, here you go. However, after conversation with Officer Defina, I decided that maybe it was just a point of frustration with the way things are going in the newspaper, etc. So therefore, I chose to downgrade it to a counseling. But initially, yes, my response was that he was insubordinate, and I was going to be pushing for that one day.
I want to go back to the SRO log. How long had your client been SRO officer before he was made aware of an SRO log?
There is no SRO log that states SRO log. He still does the daily patrolman's log. They didn't institute one.
Well, it was used by his predecessor as well.
That's unknown.
Daily patrol log, was it always recognized by you as being the SRO log? This is just a game of semantics here.
There was no SRO log at that time. I asked if they could clarify this. To this day, they still refuse to clarify any of the statements, any of the questions I had within that packet that I submitted.
I think the point being that the program is evolving, and when the captain brought up SRO log, it was the understanding that perhaps this was something new that was going to be introduced that had to do specifically with the schools, as opposed to what a daily patrolman would fill out with motor vehicle stops and arrests and those type of incidents.
Okay. I make a motion to adjourn this meeting until Wednesday, at 5:45, again in this location. 5:30? No, 5:45. Oh, we posted at 5:30. All right, 5:30. All in favor? Aye. Meeting's adjourned.
Oh, God. Tell him not to. Tell him not to. Because I did, and he's not doing it again. Yeah, $900 the first night of his
Absolutely. I'm glad. I'm glad. You know what?
I was
It's a miracle. Yes. I do. Only to be told. You went to the library, take the library meeting. Oh, yeah. Good. Did you get a tour? Yeah.
I walked down myself.
Okay. And are you
Wasn't real proud.
okay. Look at that. Look at that. Probably between Rio. David, he's 10. Because there's story hours like this.
When you get 60 years old, you can get things.
That's tough.
It's true. But I did stop in to see.
Good. No,
And I may stop in later.
good. Take something out. Borrow something.
My wife said I'm not to borrow anything.
Why?
You have to pay back.
All right. All right.
All right, I'll see you, man.
Good to see you. All right.
You guys sing at Southern Lodge. Come on.
Just lift your hand.
No, hey, it's that show. Be careful there.
No, we're going to go out. Oh, all right. Okay. Drive slow.
It does. The support is
No, the Attorney General.
Yeah. You never would. Thanks. Bye.
Why not? Why not? When you pay for 2 lawyers for 6 hours? Can we upload this?
Probably.
Chris, okay if people come back?
I'll see you guys later. Hey, just stay out of trouble, man.
I'm probably going to get grounded for that. Is it okay
I got his card. Who was that? He was going a mile a minute. Oh, the one behind you? Can you believe it? Because I saw her, I saw this one here, and I saw this one that it could go in. It'd be my third one. That's good. That's good. You know, it needs to happen. That was so. It took us 2 weeks to write. His name is James Higgins. H-I-G-G-I-N-S.